All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Titus Capilnean. I'm the VP of Go-to-Market at Civic, and I'm the host of the Tokenized Identity podcast, a show where we discuss the latest and the greatest happening at the intersection of digital identity and blockchain technology. Now, if you haven't already, hit the like button, use the subscribe button on YouTube, follow us on X, on LinkedIn, or your favorite podcasting platform. Stay up to date with the latest episodes and updates. It helps us keep going with this pod. Now, before we begin, I want to share a bit more about Civic. We're a tokenized identity platform that provides builders with both like Web 2 and Web 3 in Web 3 spaces with the tools to prevent bot attacks, Sybil attacks, to enforce identity-related restrictions by tokenizing CAPTCHA, liveness, uniqueness, identity verifications, other types of checks that you might need while preserving user privacy. Now, today we're going to talk about some ways to reimagine identity as we're like upgrading our tech stacks and moving into a Web 3 world. And we have Lasha from Rarilabs, the co-founder of Rarilabs, the provider of the Rarimo protocol, a privacy-first social protocol that is working to unlock a new generation of incognito social apps. So, Lasha, please introduce yourself to our listeners, and we'll take it from there.
Hi, Titus. Great to be here. And we've been working together with Civic for a while now, and we have like all this experience within the identity space. What we're doing at Rarilabs and with the protocol Rarimo, it's basically we're building this privacy-first ZK social protocol. So it's like a social graph of like all the history, relationship, networks, and all these kind of like different identity uses across the ecosystem. And it's just like this entire graph is kind of confidential. So only a user is able to reveal certain relationships between the objects time-wise or like the different attributes of identities. So that's in a nutshell what Rarimo is and what we're contributing to build in this decentralized social narrative.
Very cool, very cool. And what are you working on right now? What's kind of a project you want to share with everyone tuning in?
So overall, the infrastructure went live a couple of months ago, and since then we're working with the different identity providers such as Civic, exploring their different user identifiers or the standards they're using and try to plug them in on our infrastructure and offer this kind of reusability aspect or like even the interoperability aspect or like this kind of archiving this historic use of those identities into a protocol. But what's most interesting, I think that the space that we're working and like tackling is this kind of like this spooky world of anonymity. So the idea is that how do you build this new anonymous interactions or like historic proofs and somehow make them verifiable as part of your reputation going forward. And it's quite an interesting world because what we see in general, like decentralized socials, and if we take some other social protocols and social graphs, they're natively public. That means that like any other application, especially at the end on the blockchain, so anyone can analyze or understand a certain relationship between a user profiles. But in our case, that's a kind of another edge of the world where all these relationships are anonymous, pseudonymous, and then kind of like we ourselves are experimenting a lot in terms of understanding how could this thing could work at scale. So I was just saying like this overall, like exploring this anonymity aspect within this decentralized social narrative and understanding like what could be like taking all these building blocks, right? For example, like an identities and identifiers that Civic has or any other service providers, identity service providers, merging it with this kind of verifiable but confidential history in the form of the kind of social graph, and then working and understanding what could be a new type of social applications that use this verifiable identity and identifiers, merged with confidential and full anonymity for certain interactions. And so far, it's been going well. Of course, there's like this specific verticals or narratives that are more tangible, and today you can say that are the kind of driving narratives within this space, such as like, I don't know, a lot of use cases of social apps we have around the social activism, about this kind of citizens coordination, or like even some like the political spicy things happening on top of the protocol.
So I want to dig deeper into something you guys have been working on and have released like relatively recently. Like there's a lot of talk happening around like zero knowledge proofs in the space for like a long time. I've been in the cryptos and identity space for like 7+ years now. Can you talk about more about what you're doing with zero knowledge proofs, especially for the biometric passports? I understand like this is an open source project that you've worked on. I think that's a really cool kind of breakthrough. Not a lot of people know a lot about what information like the passport itself contains and how you guys have managed to leverage that.
Sure, I think like there are like a couple of teams in general working with the zero knowledge passports, and recently we've actually like brought a lot of these smaller teams together, and we're willing to like continue this open source development around the passport technology, and just like making it as a kind of a community and public good, because I think it's a quite unique thing. So every biometric passport has more than like 1 billion biometric passports are the travel passports that people have, just to like clarify. And as anyone has gone through some border control, and then you see that how they scan your passport, or like sometimes they tap and extract the information. So basically what happens there is that like every passport has a biometric chip that has your identifiers, such as your name, your age, your citizenship, and like a couple of like interesting additional identifiers. But what's most important is that it has the certificate and the signature from a state, and it's as it is like a standardized across the world. So you can imagine these biometric passports to be one of the largest existing identity networks issued by the state authorities, and standardized, what's most important, exists. In general, it's a very estimate, but more than like 1 billion such biometric passports are in circulation and issued by more than 172 countries. So we were like pretty amazed by this infrastructure and technology, and we were experimenting, and we wanted to like, as we focused on the anonymity, of course, the lowest hanging fruit from a use case perspective was voting. So we saw like, okay, anonymous voting is something everybody has been talking about for long, but what if we bring something like citizen-based voting into a narrative? So we started experimenting and looking at these biometric passports, and soon we realized that you could build these zero knowledge proofs around this individual docs, and going forward you could allow people to prove their eligibility to vote through own age or being a citizen of a certain country without disclosing any of this information. So what started off as a kind of a ZK passport technology for bringing those identifiers and being able to communicate anonymously to the rest of the ecosystem, it became, in a very short period of time, quite a huge political use case, because this week the Russian opposition leaders are reusing this entire open source technology that we labeled under the freedomtool.org to run a referendum against the current president of the country. And let's see how that goes. It's quite a exciting use case, and I would say it's the first time when you have this privacy technology, voting merged with politics and the blockchain, what's most important part. And let's see how that goes.
Now look, as much as like I love as the European Union like member, citizen, all that stuff. As much as I like those gates and like how they scan my passport and how it works like really quickly, I think your use case is even more important, more interesting as we're moving more of in a digital world. And not everybody can show up to like a voting station, or that voting station might be closed, or like the roads might be closed to it, or they might not be in the country altogether to be able to vote. So I think it's really cool that you guys are building the infrastructure to enable something like that. Because I think like from a voting perspective, like the biggest risk is like suppression or influence. Like if you know who is, like if you're recorded and like somebody knows you voted a certain way, then there might be consequences in places that are less free.
It's always like relative, like I've been like studying all these different use cases or misuse or like the coercion within the voting processes, and read a lot of like critics about like why digital voting would never happen and all the stuff, and learned a lot of case studies starting from like the government implemented in Estonia to this kind of other countries using it. And I think like it's going to happen. It's very really convenient on one end, and another one is that if you really using it in a digital form, it costs like tenfold. So like running 100K anonymous voting now costs could vary from chain to chain, but like on estimate, it could vary from 10K to like 30K, which is like fraction compared to even conducting a physical survey or like the opinion polling, And I think like those tools in a digital realm are very important, both for society, to politics, to even like a very easy example is like online surveys, right? Or really understanding what is happening in the head of your civilians or like group of people. And I mean, I call it like it's inevitable thing to happen. It's the question is like, is it going to be these federated models that we are pushing and building, and the zero knowledge proofs dominating this kind of verification, or is it going to be driven by the state and centralized servers? And of course, I'm a supporter of the first method.
Yeah, I've definitely seen the second method implemented, like when the government like spins up some programs and like, well, it might be a private company, maybe it's like the centralized communication services, and it works, but like you don't know like how much of that data is actually being shared in that case. Like I think in this case is more like, because it's in knowledge proofs, makes more sense. Actually, like for like the technical people out there, what is actually like being received once you use that particular protocol? What is the information that goes to the voting entity?
Steve is just so basically it's running the logic to check a certain criteria. And as an example, so you need to be over 18 to participate in a vote. So what the verify contract is verifying if your age is more than 18. So it does not even disclose how old are you. It just like provides a cryptographic proof that after a certain mathematical equation, your age is basically more than like 18. And that's kind of how the cryptographic proof in a very simplified manner looks like. And the same with the citizenship. So it just checks that you are a citizen of a certain country, and that's it. And the citizenship check, that means that it just checks that you have a valid passport, that this passport is signed by a certain state authority whose signature keys are publicly available. So anyone can build the same type of logic or infrastructure and make sure that all the passports that are scanned were issued by the state. And I think like overall, the biggest, in a way, like everybody talks, okay, zero knowledge proofs, a very important technology in terms of the voting and stuff. But I would say more interesting to drive this innovation is actually proof of citizenship. So whatever you're doing on a civic level in terms of like scanning and creating this kind of token-based identity of proof of citizenship, that's the really important move that had to be done. So it doesn't matter if a state is an issuer or civic is an issuer. If you have ability for me as a user to own my citizenship and my age in a self-sovereign way, then all these applications, whether it's like voting, polling and stuff, it's easy to implement going forward. And yeah, I mean, that's what we found with the passport, right? So suddenly you could convert this citizenship in a zero knowledge proof, and that just became a kind of a hot hit, from a product perspective.
Yeah, that makes total sense, especially for people who have like multiple ones, or like they're like it's harder to prove their citizenship in certain use cases. So yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. I know you guys have something else exciting coming up. There's an airdrop coming. Do you want to talk more about that? What's kind of the details? Like if people want to follow it, what's going on there?
Yeah, I think that another narrative that we really felt that could be easily implemented is this kind of the entire notion of programmable airdrops, right? So the people are like have been discussing this, it's always been on the conceptual level that more identifiers you have, more granular, you can make it kind of targeted thing, like whether it's an airdrop or like even like advertising or sending a message and whatever. And I think like with this identity space growing and basically merging with the blockchains, it is now only now that we have the tools to really implement this so-called like programmable airdrop to it. So one of the kind of proof of concept that we were working with like multiple partners, it's like to showcase how would an direct aid in a form of the tokens or like USDC or like a certain vouchers work for a special group. So at first you choose like a nation aid, right? So you have like all this, I don't know, sometimes hurricanes happen, sometimes like the nuclear meltdown, sometimes like all this crazy stuff, right? And then the world was to really help out the population and the citizens, and we've seen like a lot of like effort towards that. But I think like disintermediating on a technical level and making available the direct aid and airdrop to an end citizen, right? And to have this entire process based on the identity and blockchains and smart contracts, verifiable and transparent, would be a really good use case, And we always try to take this conceptual concepts and these things that has been discussed over the years, and with this identity aspects and aggregating different identity issuers to make it more tangible. And I think this airdrop in the form of the aid is a cool use case. So let's see how the world's gonna react to that and what's gonna be a feedback. But definitely, we want to like run it as first for the Ukrainian effort, and most of our team members, we still run the Ukrainian office, and a lot of folks are in Ukraine. So it's a kind of something personal to our team, and happy to have a chance to run this proof of concept on this.
Yeah, that's a really like wonderful example of proof of concept that you guys are running. I'm glad you guys chose that. I think in general for like any kind of aid or like donation system, it's always hard because like there's so many intermediaries that come into the donation process, and you never know how much of the dollar that you donated goes to the actual person at the end of the chain, and how much actually stays in the bureaucracy of it all. So I think having this more like a direct system that for sure goes to somebody that you're intending to is something that we can enable with the blockchain rails that are available right now.
Yeah, that's the thing. Of course, there's like a very early days, right, in terms of the identifiers or like the things that we can have such services from Civic and others to make more targetable the campaigns, right? But I think it's a kind of first step forward, and even like starting off with this kind of proof of citizenship and the certain aspects, it can definitely go into, and once again, we'll make this technology absolutely open source and reusable, and like we have now with the voting social apps and like other teams coordinate and reusing for other use cases. I'm pretty sure that this is another social application that could be extended and repurposed along the way.
Yeah. So let's zoom out a little bit and talk about like the space a bit more general. Like, what are you most excited about in the identity space right now?
Uh, there's like a lot of things that excites me, but of course, the one aspect is I view this identity from more like a social interaction perspective. I got really pulled into this entire activism of like, okay, how can you use the tools that we have to a real world activism, and how if there is this kind of a thin walls between the digital and the physical, that now the identity zero knowledge proofs and blockchains could merge, and that's something of my interest for sure, especially with this all this kind of social apps and use cases built on top of the protocol. Uh, I would highlight that aspect. And another one is definitely like the more identifiers we bring in and more the ownership on the user side, how this entire experiences will really look like. Like, are we gonna have sign-ins, or are we gonna have just like go in and out based on those identifiers? So I'm really excited sometimes to listen to the teams, talk to the builders of these decentralized social applications and how they really view this world emerging. And the fact is that like it's never enough. You go on Twitter, you go into like Medium or like even the research papers, and so many interesting ideas and like early implementations of the thing that gives you a sense of how different this entire Web3 identity space, especially merged with blockchains, will be compared to like the traditional social networking or interaction we have in Web2. And yeah, this basically what excites me.
Yeah, I feel like there's like we're always at an interesting trade-off between how much information are we sharing, and then how much of it do we have control after we've shared, and how much information does the other counterparty need in order to interact with us in a meaningful way, and like the value of the transaction itself. And I think that's where like the whole debate around like pseudonymity in Web3, identity transparency, the clash between like non-web or web 1 or web 2 with web 3 use cases comes in, or like the state actor that requires certain like regulatory aspects that haven't necessarily caught up to the latest kind of tools available. And then I think for me, kind of the thing that irks me the most out there is the amount of factors that you need to bring in to identify yourself, and how that those challenges are becoming more and more annoying as you're like having more devices that you're on, or interacting with more services, and you're traveling, like your IP changes, and like you have a VPN to protect yourself, or you have like two types of phones because of security purposes, or your accounts or passwords are stored in one place for a wallet versus the other, and all that fun stuff. Plus the private key and like the private passcodes. Like for a kind of a regular person, this kind of seems daunting in a way.
Yeah, I agree, and I completely agree. And this is kind of like everyone has felt this friction on everyday life to using the digital services, but I think that in Web3 we still don't have this kind of frictionless experience of using your identity and still going from service to service. This concept of like reusability and portability aspect, right? It's amazing, but still we need to deploy it on the user facing, customer facing applications. And I think that then the decision to switch or even understand what's this entire self-sovereign, like this, the selective disclosure aspects and stuff really look like, and why it's needed, we're gonna like only start reflecting on it once we have more social applications.
Yeah, and I think one piece that's like rarely talked about, and I think it's a valuable piece of the ecosystem as a feature, is like having a verification that is non-permanent. Because I feel like a lot of people are afraid of the blockchain in general, and specifically about like crypto technologies, as like it's all immutable. Like once it's out there, it's out there. Like same for the internet. Like you put something out there, like it's gonna be out there. I think as we introduce more concepts around like, hey, this thing expires after X amount of time, then it gives you almost like a sense of security because like you can re-verify yourself, even if it's like a little bit of a hurdle, but like after a period of time, that gives you a safety of like, hey, now there's not, if somebody gets a hold of this account with this token or the pass, then if that expires, then they don't have access anymore. I can just like take it over in a different place.
Definitely, yeah. I think that it's an important aspect for sure, and it just like it just shows the fact that the self-sovereign and ownership aspect as a product is highlighted there more, because you don't have to go to a state or any other service to print it out your document and try to like keep this kind of updates of your identity or your aspects per se, but you kind of like re-verifying yourself, giving this another next aspect of the sprint run of your identifiers and stuff. And I think it's an important action that users need to be prompted to do.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the only true self-sovereign identity that you have is your own person, like physically, when you are like presenting yourself somewhere, either in front of a device or in front of an authority or like in front of somebody you're transacting with. Everything else is kind of a intermediation of that, one way or the other. Unless you believe we're in a simulation and we're just pieces of code. So that also is like a caveat. So you never know.
Still, we need to prove some kind of uniqueness in our code. So
that is very true.
Would be the primary identifier we need to use, the unique.
So okay, besides the obvious risk of like identity being stolen, like somebody taking over our accounts, what are some of the other risks that you see in the identity space, and like how can we combat some of those with like tokenization?
I think that the stealing aspect is like, of course, something that everybody is like afraid of, especially if you take a responsibility to store something. Oh my God, like next day, what happens, right? But the truth is that like with even like we have all these upcoming technologies such as like the account abstractions to like self delegated the ability to sign and revoke addresses and stuff. And I think like with identity, it's even easier because in most of the cases, like you mentioned, the identifiers we use that are attached to our core identity, they are issued by external services. You will never have a service that like proves your citizenship or gives you a citizenship or you being able to verify through some, I don't know, like iris scan or something like that, because this is an identifier exclusively issued by state, right? The same happens with the other identifiers. So it's always going to be some third-party services reissuing or assisting with you with ease of like revocation and like getting back access to your identifier. So it's basically nothing to be afraid of in that real. The only difference is that the fact that now you have to be fearing the leak of the information or somebody controlling all this information. In this new dilemma, you own it and you control it. And this is just the control aspect of it. Other than that, it's the same world, but with more probability and I think more interoperability in terms of like you being able to revoke or like even get your identity reissued. So I'm a believer that those systems we're building, Web3 and through tokenization, they will be more efficient in this per se risky situations. Other than that, I think that there are a lot of like things that people look at and they think like, okay, well, oh my God, is it risky or not? So is it something that makes sense to like just be maintain the no go on chain and stuff? And you mentioned, right, this kind of a perception that everything is public and somebody is like really analyzing you. But I always say that it's relative, right? So it's not like someone has full access like currently the corporations have, and someone can like, I don't know, train their AIs and bots on this data. No, especially this control is de-risking all these kind of futuristic doomsday scenarios where one organization or one AI runs this analysis and test on your identity. And I think it's a countermeasure of this kind of the futuristic doomsday scenarios, but I think that people are aware of and more or less sensitive with this publicly facing blockchain registries being used for the tokenization of those aspects.
Yeah, and I feel like in a way, I think it's our job to make sure like people are aware, like as blockchain companies, like crypto companies, like we don't want to hold data as much as like we can. Like minimum possible to be able to run the service, things like that is like kind of the ethos that I've heard in this ecosystem. I've been in it for a while. It's not like a, I don't know, a traditional company that's just like hoarding all the data so they can sell you better ads. That's not what we do around here. Like our job is to like make sure there's like one person, one wallet, for example, or like this is actually a real person, not a bunch of bots trying to access an airdrop, or like use cases like that. Or it's like this person has the right age or citizenship to vote in a specific referendum or action like that they're trying to get into. So that's the kind of stuff that I think moves the needle, where we're reinforcing the fact like, hey, we're in this together. Like this whole thing kind of is complicated for all of us. We want to make it easier. We want to make it more seamless, remove the hurdles, and make it safer for everyone to be both like in the like Web2 internet, but also in like the Web3 space where more and more people are trying to participate. So one thing, like you mentioned AI, and I want to touch upon this, like how do you think like proof of personhood could help combat like AI fraud? We're seeing all these like deep fakes issues come up. We're seeing like people trying to defraud like C-levels of big companies to wire money. We're seeing like all sorts of like videos pop up without user consent. Like how can identity verification help prevent that?
Yeah, I think that proof of personhood or humanity, I think it will be like a universal badge. But of course, you're going to have a different methods of verification. So you don't always have to, you can have like a biometric aspect of verification of your humanhood. You can have some other identity and identifier based verification that does not involve scanning your fingerprints or eyes or anything like that. Or you can have even more like a social graph and activity based algorithmic verification of your human. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to having a badge that differentiates you from the autonomous agents. And I always try to highlight that, like, the fact that, okay, there's going to be an AI and you need to differentiate that you're human versus AIs, it's not always a doomsday scenario that now we need, like, somebody's trying to forge our identity. But basically, the future of the internet and the networking looks like that there's going to be a bunch of people and there's going to be a bunch of, like, call it like a friendly AI agents, right? So I could have my personal AI agents. They could be like multiple posts. And sometimes this kind of line between you're communicating with my AI agent or like the kind of me directly as into live stream, it will be hard to differentiate. So this badge aspect, it will be just like a sign that it is me and it is my AI bot that you're communicating with. But of course, it all hedges between the kind of misuse and like the ability to forge the identities, and it will be a kind of quite a universal instrument used across, I would say, any digital interaction. So sometimes it even won't be like, it might start off as something like, you have this kind of a star here of a human sign, then I'm a human and you're a human as well. But at the end of the day, it might be just a backend technology where you just like set up whether you want to connect directly with the person or communicate through an AI agent. And based on that logic, that automatically connects you and routes you from person to person. Because in a way, like a bit of like a philosophical term, but if you go a bit like futuristic, I believe that the human connection or interactions online that will work like the website, like all the website security aspects or like certificates and stuff, they run in the back, and all you do is just like, type in, who to reach out, and suddenly you get connected. So same type of things will happen. So humans will be like the websites, but we will route to each other and connect to each other based on those unique characteristics and identifiers that we all have. So it will be like if we're both humans, we want to connect as humans, and we share common characteristics of our like identifiers of being citizens of this country around the certain topics of contributing. It will be just like this kind of frictionless ability to me to broadcast the message to you and you to receive, and vice versa. And we over time will just remove all those, certified human signs or something that might emerge at first.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would love a world where like we have a bit more certainty around that, like the fact like if I can just delegate certain tasks to an autonomous agent for a defined period of time to act on my behalf and do certain things that I allow it to do, like for example, I don't know, book me a flight or book this hotel for me or schedule meetings, and some of these like already happening through your email, but like a lot of those are not actually easily revocable. You just have to disconnect your entire account from that agent altogether. It's not like you're spinning up an agent and spinning it back down. You just like kind of spin it up and it's up. And if somebody somehow takes control of that account, they can continue to act on your behalf even if it's actually not you anymore, which is kind of scary from a security perspective.
But in a way, like if you make this a very friendly talk of the future where you have a personal assistant, right, and an AI perspective, then this ownership of identity and identifier suddenly completely makes sense, because you want the full control of your identifier's identity, interest, social graphs, relationship, and you being able to selectively share it to an AI agent, or the alternative is some corporation owns all this information and basically feeds to a central AI, and then it just like feeds you whatever information. So I think like the path to AI agents, it's pretty much forged, right? So that's the future. That's a very convenient future, and it's very comfortable to work and live through that. And now you see this clear distinction, like, okay, you want to go through a self-sovereign ownership and full control, or you just want to delegate it to a central corporation who most probably will misuse it at a larger scale, right?
I mean, we have the example in the payment networks where like everybody that I know has had a card that was copied at one point or another, or at least attempted to. So all those like, because that's in a way that's kind of happening when you're trying to, for example, pay something online. You're delegating temporarily to the payment gateway the information from your card, for example, to make a payment for a strict specific amount, and then that gets revoked afterwards because the token expires. So we already have that technology. It's just a matter of applying it to AI agents and make it more decentralized a little bit and then revocable.
Yeah, and the thing that like these AI agents is they become personal, and now they create this kind of personalized perception of even yourself. I think that will drive more and more this ownership around identity and the attributes, and even like privacy and this anonymity and stuff. It will be more tangible on an individual level. What I feel that like for all those years, the concepts such as like privacy or like the kind of security and stuff, it has been very generalized. It was like, okay, yeah, like state is watching you, and they're like, how you don't really feel it. But once it's something that knows your name and communicates back, I think that's the moment when you realize that, okay, maybe I need to now really have control over the certain aspect of things.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other piece that like we all have to kind of work towards is getting the standards widely implemented so we're all a bit more interconnected. Because I feel like everybody kind of thinks, oh, it's all going to connect over the internet, but like there's all these standards and communication protocols, APIs, like they all need to interact with each other, like speak the same language essentially, and like the same data formats. Otherwise, we'll have a very hard time integrating.
That's true. I mean, that's like very true. And that's something we need to really think from the day one. Because even if you take this, all the examples of like, basically we know, right, the digital identities in a very early form of 2000s, they were just like driven the state innovation, right? Back then, there was not even called identities. It was more like digital signatures. And if you look at the history of how long it took, it didn't happen at the end, but all these kind of different vertical, different methods, or like digital signature, starting from devices to corporate to state and stuff, it created quite a jungle. And in the end, we just like everybody was waiting for this cross-border digital signature things to work, but we ended up with a world where suddenly we spent billions of dollars, state like poured in like European Union for like more than like 16 years, tried to harmonize these different standards, but in the end we ended up having a broken and not workable thing. And we need to be very cautious now, especially with this identity aspect, to have this interoperability from day one. Because at the end of the day, we just like, it's a user experience aspect, right? It's not just like, oh, we want to work with other services. It's like users need to have frictionless ability to port from one place to another, to enter from one service to another. And that's 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 like should be our focus in terms of the customer value.
I wish more countries would follow that ethos, like just like frictionless and reduce kind of the burden on each person to, I don't know, get some like kind of paperwork mailed or go in person to some office and like, can we please do more things online? I think that's kind of my takeaway here. I want to take this time to thank you, Lasha, for taking the time to join our first episode here, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And once again, like if you haven't done that already, please hit that like button, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on X, LinkedIn, your favorite podcasting platform, stay up to date. Yep, and tune in for the next one. We're just getting started.